Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Let Them Eat Cake. This episode will be a continuation of our last episode discussing the build-up to genocide in Tigray, Ethiopia. We will be discussing the conditions of the genocide, how the Ethiopian government is enacting it, among other details. Just like last episode, we will be speaking to a Tigrayan who has personal connection to the area. As mentioned, this will be the second of 2 parts covering Tigray. If you're listening to this one, please listen to episode 6 to give yourself adequate background in order to understand the genocide to its fullest extent. Episode 6 is one of the most in-depth discussions around the build-up towards this genocide, but if you choose to just listen to episode 7, that's perfectly fine. However, it is our recommendation that you go back for full context. As always, we are 5th Gen, an information warfare cooperative that aims to shed light on things those in power want to be kept in the dark. We want to give a voice to the voiceless and give people the information they need to thrive in a world that tries so hard to starve you of it. I am Jack, and my co-host is John, and we hope you enjoy the show.
We have a weapon more powerful than the British Empire, and that weapon is our refusal to bow to any order but our own, any institution but our own.
It's funny because you see all over the world there was this conspiracy theorist where they're talking about how COVID is going to lead to the government like overtaking their power, and stuff. The only place it really happened was Ethiopia, where COVID was abused for a regime.
Yeah, that's true. It was a charade. There was a lot of discussions where regime selected experts to say, well, it was okay. The constitution doesn't say anything about this, and it is okay to passport. And a lot of people opposed it, including a lot of major political figures in Oromia. As was this happening, the TPLF escalated also warmongering.
They were pissed.
Yeah.
They were fucking pissed.
Yeah. And you have to understand, this was in the backdrop of a lot of pogrom movements, right? In parallel with the protests, there was a lot of displacement. Like, for example, there were 100,000 displaced Tigrayans during the protests when Abiy Ahmed came to power. In southern Ethiopia, 2 million people were displaced. Similarly, some conflict, right? We don't know what happened, but it's clear that it was ethnic-based pogroms, right? But you wouldn't hear this because the foreign policy establishment of the West and their media connections were silent about this. They didn't care because they were talking about how it was convenient to talk about how reformist he was and how he won the Nobel Peace Prize and how democracy was like flourishing in Ethiopia. But in reality, it is absolutely fascinating. What was happening was completely the opposite of what was in the media. You do not believe it. They are trying to admit now, like, oh, we didn't know this was happening. They said mea culpa. They are slowly admitting it, but they are pretending not to notice it. Like, they know what was happening. It's a major issue, right?
Recently, this has been flipped where here Abiy, he's saying that the Americans like the TPLF, and that's why they're doing this, is that the TPLF is the CIA-backed coup against him.
The same thing that everyone says.
Yeah,
it's the CIA.
That's what I always say. It's Dictator 101. Always blame the United States.
So the people who orchestrated this violence within the State Department are actually long-time diplomats in the Horn of Africa, right? Even if it is Trump, they knew what they were doing. They just wanted to change the situation completely. It was a radical U.S. policy, right? Encouraging the rehabilitating the Eritrean regime. It is unthinkable in general, right? And also ignoring the human rights, because they were a lot harder against the TPLF's, the EPRDF regime's human rights violations than Abiy Ahmed's. But Abiy Ahmed, in my opinion, Abiy Ahmed's repression was far reaching than the EPLF's. But the reason is, one, he was focusing on the TPLF. It didn't matter for the West. And also, since all the opposition has just become pro-regime, because now he's attacking their former enemy, there was no opposition also, even within Ethiopia. And now the TPLF and the Americans do not like each other in general, right? Actually, they hated so
Did
much.
we mention that they have kind of communist roots, by the way?
Yes, they were communist roots. They are Marxist. They were Albanian communism influenced people within the TPLF. However, the TPLF leader Meles Zenawi came to Washington D.C. in 1991, pleading with him that not to call him communists. We're not communists. Can you stop calling us communists? Meles Zenawi is known for being shrewd. Also, he's also like along Isaias Afwerki in terms of like political machinations. So I can say that he pleaded with them not to call them communists. So the idea is, we're not communists, don't hate us. They didn't want the wrath of American anti-communism, right? But even if they say that, they were able to maintain economic independence to the chagrin of American foreign policy establishment. They didn't like them. The obvious reason is neoliberalism, right? They wanted
all the gold.
Yes, it's quite trivial. Now, when Abiy Ahmed came to power, that is what they were looking at. They did not know. Well, actually, they knew. They just did not care, right? Because how would a CIA analyst miss that one of the dominant groups is going to be attacked by a new regime, and then right?
I mean, I know a little bit more about the CIA, but they're really like
ambitious,
incompetent, actually. So I wouldn't say incompetent as much as they are reckless.
I would say very reckless.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to Ethiopia, they were very reckless, because it is hard to miss what was happening. There was no human security in Ethiopia. You can talk to anyone in Ethiopia, like person to person. They say, well, we don't feel safe, like at an individual level, not at a political level. During the APR regime, what was apparent, what happening was political repression. But Abiy Ahmed, there was political repression, there was human repression. Like, you don't know who's going to actually shoot you and kill you, right? You just hope that nobody is paying attention to you. You just hope that nobody notices you in order to exist, right? They tolerated this. I guess they looked the other way, or they even encouraged it. When Abiy Ahmed was doing something bad, they would write something good about him, right? So it's completely the opposite of what would require for human rights and safety and security.
You know, there was a time and space where Saddam was the good guy.
Yeah. So there was another element to Trump administration. I think Trump knew what was happening, but barely abstractly. And what I
think there's the whole dam project going on and things like that. So I think Trump basically basically he just saw dollar signs.
Yeah, and he said, actually, Trump allied with Egypt in that case. He supported Egypt. And
really? Did he?
Yeah.
So he blocked the dam.
Yes, actually, he withdrew certain money. I don't know. It was
I wonder why that is.
Well, okay. So, have you heard about the Abraham Accords?
Yes. Actually, Jimmy Carter did some stuff in Ethiopia, kind of like a peace contract too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So the Abraham Accords, or something similar to that, related to that, there is a complication where Egypt is part of a big regional reconfiguration.
Oh yeah, they're in like the oil pact as well too.
UAE, because that was also
So so it's like America, UAE, Kuwait, Oman, like it's all the Gulf states and Egypt.
Yes, so that was the case. So everyone, including Israel, including UAE, Saudi Arabia, were fully in support of Abiy Ahmed, right? Now, think about also UAE, which had used...
you said Trump was against him building the dam. I'm confused on the framing, because we were talking about how Trump was against the dam. So I assumed that the Gulf states would be against the dam.
It wasn't exactly against the dam, but they were trying to say, well, during the APRDF regime, Ethiopia had played had a very good diplomatic success with the GERD, with the dam, right? But because of the new reconfiguration in the region that includes the UAE, Israel, and Egypt, and maybe Saudi Arabia also. So what happened is Egypt wanted more American support, and America wanted what is stability in Egypt so that it can support Israel. The whole thing is about Israel, anyway, about Israel.
Okay.
So in order to please
Of course, it's about
Israel,
Israel.
All right. Now I'm
Now it
caught
makes
up.
sense.
Now I get it.
yeah.
On board. Okay. So anyway,
While this was happening, though, remember UAE had a base in Eritrea as a base, and it was bombing Yemen from Assad, right? UAE is a big part of the war and Abiy Ahmed's reform. Basically, UAE was the money, the pocket for Abiy Ahmed for everything, right? And this comes, I don't know if this comes from Eritrean side or from American side or from both, right? This connection happened. Now, this is a radical change within Ethiopian politics. Ethiopian foreign policy is during the PRDF regime, Ethiopian policy, foreign policy is a one country to one country. They have for each country they have this policy, but in terms of Abiy Ahmed, it changed and it became more Middle East oriented, Middle East that Gulf friendly, Arab friendly foreign policy, as opposed to like one to one. Anyway, so what happened in this regard is Abiy had full Arab Emirates money. Now, Americans let this happen because once the Biden administration came, the drones, there were drone strikes, and they completely changed the war situation. But once Biden came, they dismantled the Arab drone base,
so the
and
Arabs were launching drones into the Tigrayan forces.
yes,
Okay,
that
I
is
didn't even know about that.
well, we will talk about that maybe later. So the reason I'm talking about this is the money connection. Also, Abiy Ahmed got the money from the Emiratis, and the political, diplomatic, and media coverage came from the West. And this is significant because he was taking Ethiopia to hell as they were praising him, as they were praising him when they were talking about how great he is. There were so many words about this guy, but within Ethiopia things were getting really really rough in terms of politics, in terms of security, in terms of peace and stuff like that. So, for example, nobody talks about how Tigray was blocked. To Tigray, there are so many ways to go, like Afar and Amhara region. The main route for Tigray to the outside world is through Amhara region. It was blocked the entire period of Abiy's rule. He was weakening Tigray slowly. They were weakening it until they finally start the war. Right now,
And what's interesting about this is the UAE involvement, because they do the same thing in Yemen, because they blockade the Arabian Gulf there.
In terms of their involvement in the Tigray war, is they supplied the drones, completely disarmed the TPLF. They lost all their material advantage, the initial material advantage within a month. They completely destroyed them, right? So they had to change to guerrilla fighting. So the Trump administration knew the general themes of what was happening. So it has to do with Egypt, Israel, and the UAE, and like rehabilitate South Africa and do something around the Red Sea and stuff like that. What they didn't care about is at what cost. At what cost is this alliance, regional reconfiguration, neoliberalism in Ethiopia being implemented? They didn't care about that. This support actually went
100% agree.
Yeah, and this support actually went on longer than I would have liked, because I kind of, we were looking at it like it's pretty clear the Americans were like leading the war effort also diplomatically. They were giving cover to Isaias Afwerki, the Eritrean regime. It is mind blowing that they were giving cover to Eritrea, for example, when everyone knew, when people were telling that Eritrean forces are committing atrocities in Tigray. The American State Department was saying, "Oh, there are no Eritrean troops. They are restrained. Eritrea is restrained. There are no troops in Tigray, right?" So they say their hope was that the war would be completed by Christmas, but I don't know. I think that's dishonest. There is no way that could have happened.
Yeah, because it started at the end of November.
Yeah, there's no way that could have happened because Tigray is has a history of resistance.
Yeah,
they are going to fight it.
You're not. They're not going to desert storm.
Yeah, it's impossible to do that.
Jack, I just sent you a picture on Twitter in the DMs. So what I sent you is specifically, it was amazing because the U.S. Congress or whatever Senate, they came together and passed a bipartisan bill about the conflict. So Jack, I just want you to go ahead and read what this bill says.
This resolution calls for the immediate cessation of hostiles in the Tigray region of Ethiopia and condemns all violence against civilians. Further, the resolution calls on Eritrea to withdraw its military forces from Ethiopia, and it urges all parties to the conflict to cease hostilities and work to protect human rights. Ironic. The resolution also calls on relevant US agencies to take specified action that encourage an end to the conflict and provide humanitarian support.
That last line right there, right? So the whole first line is just a whole bunch of bullshit. It's just them going, bad stuff is going on and we're recognizing it, right? But that last line is sus,
It's just humanitarian assistance, in my opinion. I couldn't. Can you text me because I couldn't see it. The resolution also calls on relevant US agencies to take specified actions that encourage an end to the conflict and provide humanitarian. Yeah, I agree. This is sus. We don't know what relevant actions are. So here is how I would define the American-Ethiopian relationship during the APRDF and during Abiy Ahmed, right? The APRDF regime was a hated regime by the Americans because of human rights, if we take the American government at face value. But the main reason is the APRDF regime tried to maintain certain level of economic independence, right? Also, Ethiopia was a client state of the US, but the regime was hated by the US. The American foreign policy establishment had grudge with the TPLF. They hated it, right? But Abiy Ahmed came to power, the clientship increased, and also they tried to cover up for the regime longer than they would have liked because of the atrocities is unheard of, like it's unimaginable. They couldn't justify that. It's impossible for them to say, "Oh, I think this is tolerable," because when it started, there was a blackout, right? They hoped that the war would be completed without the world knowing. Even before the Trump administration admitted the atrocities or gave voice to the people of Tigray, the Biden administration kind of leaked some information, right? The first leak was that there were Israeli forces in Tigray operating and committing atrocities, right? This was a leak before the Biden administration came to power.
I remember this going down. I was covering it right there in November and trying to get everyone to pay attention to what was about to go down. You just can't raise awareness for it. But I think it's been pretty amazing what has come out of it as far as like the ability for the diaspora to use social media to actually let people know what's been going on there, conflict maps, the fact that we are able to get videos of the massacres going on. All of that stuff is being done by citizen journalists because there's no truth anymore.
Yeah. And also, I actually want to acknowledge and thank you for your for paying attention. I mean, I can say, oh, it's everybody's responsibility. It's also your line of interest and kind of ignore it. But I think you deserve a credit for paying attention, right? And I cannot tell you how thankful and grateful I am personally, right? These things are about eyeballs, right? even reading the stories coming out in Tigray is a huge favor for the people of Tigray, right? But people just ignore, oh, this is just one conflict that's happening. So you have to understand you are very unique in this regard. Even if you just read and do anything about it, even reading by itself is a huge step, a huge action in my opinion, right? And also our comrades did a lot of things, but you came out of nowhere and you started posting about it and stuff like that, right? Yes, it was very important to do that.
Oh, it's also,
So
I
thank
also
you.
was always going hard when the Starbucks campaign started.
Yeah,
I was all ready to get behind that, and even they have the union going on right now, and
yeah,
the entire time the union's been forming, I've been going, but are you going to stop using, like, are you going to stop empowering a genocide in Ethiopia with your union? Like,
yeah, yeah. So I'm impressed. I don't know what led you to that, because that is not the mainstream thinking, even within radical circles in the West. But
well,
I
we were
am very
worried
good.
that, so Eritrea did get pulled in right away, so that was one of our big fears. But our greatest fear was restarting the conflict in Sudan, and then Somalia spilling over, and just the entire Horn of Africa collapsing. So that's what a
Yeah,
lot of early analysts were looking at, like, oh my God, this could be really, really bad. And compared to, because that's the thing is when I do polls and things like that, and I ask my followers, where's the worst place on earth? Always, 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 they say, not unanimously, but Tigray gets the most replies, that it's probably the
yeah,
worst place on earth right now. So
exactly.
even that, it could have been so much worse if these other places collapsed alongside it. So
Yeah.
it's
So
kind of lucky for everyone else around them and unlucky for them.
yeah, exactly. That not no action is being taken is just geopolitics, or whatever the Americans want to frame it. Like it depends on American completely. I'm telling you, if
They're
America wanted
completely
to stop this
silent on
fight,
it.
yeah, yeah,
They
they
could
would have
step
stopped
in.
it. Yeah,
Like,
they would have stopped
look
it.
at so UN supply convoys got bombed during the Somali conflict too, and look what happened
Hmm.
with the Americans then. Go ahead, Jack.
Hmm.
So what action would you theoretically want to happen from the international community? What would be satisfactory a satisfactory addition from the global community?
Well, the first thing I would want is to completely withdraw their support for the Abiy regime, politically, diplomatically, rhetorically, propaganda-wise also, and monetary, right? So what they're doing is, their idea is, if they can talk to, and they didn't do that. They are still supporting the regime,
And
Abiy Ahmed.
also, as far as NATO goes, they're of course using their dog Turkey there. So NATO is involved, but they always use Turkey to, like, pretend that they're not, even though we obviously know what they're doing.
Exactly. So, for example, they stopped the drones at some point, if you remember, right? They continue. They stopped the UAE drones. I think America was able to stop them, but the problem is we don't know exactly who is delivering the drones right now. I think it's Turkey. It's the Turkey drones that is destroying. They changed the war. The drones changed the course of the war twice. The first one is during the beginning, right? This were UAE drones. They were huge. I don't know. I don't know if you have read, but they were huge part of the calculation. Even when the TDF, the Tigrayan army, pressed towards Addis Ababa, reaching Debre Berhan, the drones were ready. They started to attack the long supply line and stuff like that. So now, when I talk about the international community, the first thing, the only thing, for me personally, I don't necessarily. I'm happy. I mean, if Tigray wants, if they ask for NATO help, I don't like. It's not my business. I don't like it. But especially at the beginning, the atrocities were so like very overwhelming, and there was no, and the propaganda, the hate propaganda, the genocidal propaganda were escalating. The only way to stop it was some kind of international intervention, but that was not going to happen. And the reason is, you can read their statements. It was completely appeasement of the Abiy regime. So we wanted our two things I want. They have to talk about Tigray all the time, and they have to explain exactly what's happening in Tigray. Usually what they say is, oh, there is atrocities against students. They don't talk about the scale. They don't think about the system, the systematic nature of it. And they don't talk about what it is supported. Like, for example, religious leaders, media, institutions like human rights institutions. Like, for example, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission its business is not human rights. It is the opposite of it. You wouldn't believe what the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission does. It is to cover up the atrocities, right? And you can read it. I mean, if you carefully read the reports, you'll see that, oh, there was some conflict in Tigray, kind of thing. Oh, there was some civilians were harmed. They say there are some things going on, but they don't even want to. They don't want to interpret what this means, right? They don't want to say, oh, the scale. And in certain terms, they want to, in certain situations, they justify it. What did the international community do? They gave support to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission when it is covering up the genocide. And this is so enraging, and I don't even want their money or anything, like, right? We want to withdraw their support to the Abiy regime, monetary, diplomatically, politically, and media coverage. They were covering up both in their statements and in their approach. So taking pictures with Abiy Ahmed saying, oh, there is humanitarian improvements. They don't want to talk about, for example, the scale of the violence. We don't know exactly how many people have died so far. A European university has said 500,000 people have died because of the conflict, and about 200,000 people died by either direct killing, massacres, or hunger and stuff like that, right? So what the international community is doing is still covering up the atrocities in Ethiopia. I think, in my opinion, if they could actually explain exactly what's happening and do not support, I think the international community would be enraged to the extent there could be a certain level of pushback, right? But what they're doing is
we have
normalizing.
Acknowledgement, of course, from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Genocide Watch. I just sent something on them in the chat. So there's all that stuff that's always going to be there, no matter how small it is. But there is there's UN recognition and there's American recognition, and the UN is there. They're sending, people are dying trying to get aid trucks in there, and this blockade won't end.
Yeah, for example, they killed about 25 aid workers. Imagine that. Where does and this is in 1 year, in 2 years, right? It's not even 2 years, right? So the scale, the cruelty, the scale, I said, and the manner, and there is no end to it, right? So given this, the way the West is responding is absolutely unacceptable, right? Because what they're doing is when they talk about, they call Putin what is it called? A war criminal.
They call him a war criminal. They're saying it's a genocide.
Yeah.
They've actually, a few countries, I know Ireland for a fact, has recognized that there's a genocide in Ukraine right now. And, that's what really disappoints me, because Ireland is normally on the ball with these types of things, but they've been relatively silent on Tigray.
On Tigray? Oh, I actually love Ireland. They did not do that, but it is my favorite country. I actually said, okay, I will tolerate a nation state of Ireland. A lot of people didn't like it, but they, in my opinion, I think they could have political reasons, but they were the ones. Ireland was the one who was pushing the UN Security Council for meetings. Who was talking about hunger in Tigray, famine in Tigray, and stuff. They were releasing a lot of statements. I am willing to forgive Ireland for not only forgive, actually positively say Ireland was doing great. They were pushing the government to talk about the right. The one thing that Ireland at least did is that there is hunger, and that the government should talk more about Tigray, and also in the Security Council they were requesting a lot of meetings and statements, writing statements and stuff like that. Ireland did great. I think I would say actually.
But I didn't even know
Ireland,
about this because like I don't know how I missed this, because normally I'm on the ball with that exact type of stuff. So
yeah.
Okay.
So
I retract everything I said. Way to go, Ireland. You did it again.
Way to go. Yeah. you can with small cloud. Ireland did a lot of work to save Tigray.
It's not a huge place. It's not a huge place.
It's not a huge place, but they did more than others.
Well, isn't it amazing just how much you can accomplish with just a little bit of international,
Exactly.
So that's that's what's really strange to me is we know what's going on, and also we should be clear that the TPLF are fighting back. So there is crimes happening on both sides, but one side has a genocide and one side doesn't. So I just want to be clear about that.
Yes. Yes. Oh.
But the thing is I don't understand why nobody is intervening when there's clearly a genocide going on.
Yeah. Now that's a good question. Two things. One is Abiy Ahmed is their guy. So, and this is to the extent they knew this would happen, right? It's not the Americans are not dumb, right? They know everything that's happened. They know the rhetoric. The genocidal propaganda is quite explicit, right? It's explicit. It's not subtle. You know what I'm saying?
It's not subtle, but I think that's because they are dumb. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that their propaganda isn't subtle because they're not smart enough to do subtle propaganda.
Here is the thing why that doesn't make sense, right? Because they actually, like for example, they talk about Amhara genocide, right? Amhara, as a government, the Amhara region is committing genocide in Tigray, right? In Western Tigray, there is ethnic cleansing. They destroyed the villages. There were massive sexual violence, killings, massacres.
So it's some of the worst sexual violence that I've ever seen. Or not, I haven't seen it because it's not like we're seeing that part of it because we're not seeing much. But we see enough to know that it's very serious. That's what's going on there. It's actually more people, I think. But the sexual violence, I wanted to comment on one thing is that there was this story of this refugee, and I'm pretty sure it was Amhara, but they took an iron rod and they heated it up so it was red hot, and they inserted it inside her and like destroyed her entire reproductive organs and things like that, telling her that the Tigray shouldn't reproduce and things like that. And it's like that's the level of stuff that we're seeing. It's insane.
Also the Eritrean forces also did do that also.
It was the Eritrean ones that did that.
Yes.
One.
Yeah. So the scale, the extremism, like the cruelty, the barbarism, is, I don't know if there is more cruelty than what happened in Tigray. I would be mind blown. Like, it is completely unheard of, right? So they know this. Why are they not doing anything? Not even withdrawing their support. It has to do with their ideology, completely ideological. Because Abiy said he would liberalize the country, and then it's open for business and stuff like that. There is no way this would have happened even in a mildly independent country. They wouldn't do that. So it's completely about how the regime is a puppet, and it can get away with everything. Abiy Ahmed can get away with everything.
Yeah, because once you let the Americans in, they'll keep you in power.
Exactly.
So I wanted to because we're getting on really long here. So what I wanted to talk about is how the tide changed and how basically the state started losing to rebel forces.
Okay, that's a good question. Um, so the way it happened is when the war started, the TPLF or the Tigray government was able to actually capture some of the huge military arsenal in Ethiopia. Like the North Command in Tigray is the largest command of the Ethiopian state, the ENDF or the Ethiopian military. So they were all able to capture huge arsenal and they were able to hold it down for about a month. But while they were doing this, they also lost most of their tanks, their artillery to drone attacks. After that, what they did is they started just traveling around Tigray. So one of the military leaders said that I have traveled Tigray twice or once or something like that. Like they were so mobile, but there were close calls. They were encircled, and they were able to get out of it through a lot of sacrifices or some techniques. We don't know. We have to see yet, but they were able to break out. But the thing is, while this was happening, the Eritrean, Amhara, and Ethiopian military were committing unspeakable atrocities across Tigray, all over Tigray, that the people couldn't just breathe, right? So the only way to survive was to join the resistance, like the armed struggle. And when they were doing that, actually, it wasn't easy because nobody knew where the Tigrayan forces were. It started with the special forces, and what was happening is, like militarily speaking, what was happening is their first strategy was to survive, like getting out of encirclements and that sort of thing, and then being mobile, traveling by night and that sort of thing. But while this was happening, they started to train also more recruits, and people started to flow overwhelmingly to join the Tigrayan army. Even this was not easy because it was a military occupation. So if you are found, you get killed just because for appearing, for being a civilian around them. If they don't like you, they just kill you because there is no accountability. They didn't care. So when the youth were trying to join, they had to hide. Like they had to hide, and they have to hear from word of mouth and join, right? But within a few months, they were able to train about what they call army
Militia.
segments. Yes. So
Or
once they did
regiments,
that,
like different regiments.
regiments, army regiments, right? They call them army 1, army 2, army 3. I think 4 armies at the beginning. So when this was being done, but they also attacking, like guerrilla attacks, like bombs. They never stopped fighting, even as they were training, even as they were like hiding from us,
Yeah,
the
a lot
murder
of
hunt.
rocket attacks.
Yeah. Oh, that was at the beginning. I'm talking about
Oh, they
I'm
didn't
talking.
have rockets after a while, even? Because rockets are something normally you can just like lean against a rock to shoot.
Oh, they might have had. They say the heaviest gun they had was Dishka, DSHK.
Yeah,
Dish.
the heavy machine gun. It's a classic rebellion gun. It's the
Yeah,
Shika heavy machine gun. It's a Soviet gun.
yeah, they had that, and maybe some bombs and stuff like that. Because I also was hearing they were burning. Their convoy attacks was huge. Their convoy attacks actually very frustrated the
This is
invaders at
kind
that
of
time.
similar to what the gear they had when the Afghans were fighting the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
Before the actual real arms came in and they actually got like Stinger missiles and stuff. But in the beginning, they had bolt action rifles, handmade AKs, and the Dashika guns.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But
So
that was, think about how long ago that is, and that's still the best that they had to go with. Like that stuff was outdated when the Afghans were using it against the Soviets.
Yeah. So it's important also to kind of like give a context of why this was successful resistance, at least why they were able to drive out the invaders, the occupation. One is, first of all, most of the military, actually I should say all of the military leaders of the Tigrayan forces were rebels before they became military leaders of the Ethiopian state, right? So they had, most of them were, all of them, actually all of them were the TPLF won before they became now the TDF, right? So they fought for 17 years to get rid of the Derg. So, and then they became military leaders of the Ethiopian state. And in that time, they knew that they were rebels. They know how to also like kind of, there was a lot of counterinsurgency planning also. They had war with Eritrea, and they are knowledgeable in this type of thing. So when they resorted, when they were sure, they thought actually they could win the war, you know. But what they didn't calculate is especially the drones, and the extent of how much the Eritrean regime was going to participate in Tigray. They knew they would participate, but they didn't know the extent and the atrocity. So the convoy attacks were the common attacks before what they call Alula Operation Alula. The convoy attacks, but also there was some counter offenses. You see that this happening because every time there is a fighting, you hear the atrocities after the aftermath of atrocities, right? So you can actually map the number of atrocities and the number of fighters that happen. Usually after fighting, there is an atrocity. After fighting, there is an atrocity. So while doing
And
this,
there actually is people who do map this as well. You
yeah.
know, so there's a lot. I think you have one linked in your Twitter bio. Don't you have a mapper?
Yes, Ethiopia map. Oh, they were
Mm-hmm.
great, actually. They were
Yeah,
great.
they were awesome. They helped a lot. They showed,
Yeah.
that's another thing that we haven't brought up is that there was a whole like ecological reform that went on where they were they said there was a greening the desert or something like that they called
Yeah.
it, and that's
Yeah.
been completely destroyed, because they've
Yeah.
just burnt everything, all that green down.
Yeah. It's great. So all over the world, individuals, not institutions, individuals like Ethiopia map, or map Ethiopia, depending on how we want to read it. These guys were like on top of everything. I did not know, even if I have certain information from people, I did not know what that meant, right? Because I'm not a war analyst or war crime analyst, or what they mean certain things when military people say certain things, right? I didn't know how to differentiate what is real and what is probably propaganda and stuff like that. So they helped us understand the war situation, even though it is also like, although the data is with us, we didn't know what it meant. So and satellites, geolocating the atrocities and mapping who might have done it and stuff like that. So it was, I mean, Tigray was lucky in side terms. Some people were like very passionate about what they were doing, even though the entire the institutional organizations were completely out of the picture, that they were not helping at all, except like of course the human rights organizations which were also like they didn't have a chance, so they were actually writing about it. But like very radicals around the world, anarchists and certain also Marxist autonomists and stuff like that, they were paying attention. They are documenting it. I know quite a lot of people who are documenting behind the scenes, so we will see what comes out of it. But I hear people talking about it, like I'm not necessarily connected to me, but I hear them talk about how this is and stuff like that. So Tigray was lacking in that regard, because there were individuals actually paying attention. So anyway, as I said, the way it progressed, it was the first one was survival. The first phase of the fighting was kind of like to stop them and kind of get the leaders out of the cities and try to kind of save as much logistics as possible, and if they can, they would just burn it. Like, for example, I think there was a certain situation where there was an army depot and they just burned it. The TPLF just burned it because they didn't want to give them to the rockets happened, I think, around, when was it, November 14th, because the Eritrean regime has bombed. This would be November 14th. The Eritrean regime has bombed Humara town, shelled Humara town indiscriminately on the 9th and 10th, and the Tigray government launched rockets to Asmara multiple times, actually, after that, to Bahardar and Asmara multiple times. After that, even I think they might have done even once more after
Well, what about you? So we're talking. You said survival. You do what you have to survive. But how did it actually shift? Because it eventually came to the point where they were winning, and like they still kind of are. They're in it. They've basically forced what might be a ceasefire coming in.
The Ethiopian and Eritrean regime's plan was to eliminate the TPLF, like something like what happened for the during the Tamil Tigers, right? So that was their plan.
Oh my God, Jack! I just told Jack about the Tamil Tigers literally 2 days.
Yeah, so they were doing this. Besides, the other strategy is to just commit atrocities that are not only very taboo in Tigray, like in terms of cultural situation, but also in the world, it is unthinkable to commit such kind of atrocity.
When you see regimes go to that type of genocidal warfare, where you have the atrocities going on, it never works. So people kind of see this shit and they end up rebelling against the regime because they see what it's doing.
Yeah. So the people got very angry, and there was a huge motivation, awakening. And as I said, the military leaders are also, they know how to kind of manage their resources and stuff like that. They have quelled a lot of counterinsurgency, both within Ethiopia and even in Somalia. Since they were part of, they were just the main leaders of the Ethiopian army also. So they managed, and they at some point, what they started is, first it was convoy attacks, right? Convoy attacks. Then they started to talk about counter offensives, right? This military came and we did counter offensive. You hear how much they captured stuff and stuff like that, right? But at some point, they were completely cut off. We didn't know what was happening. Like I think it was for about 2 months. We didn't know if they were dead, if they were alive, if they escaped. Completely blackout. So it was one of the hardest moments. And while this was happening, there was also atrocities going on. We hear atrocities also because some of the UN organizations were releasing their statements and say, "Oh, there was violence here and there." Blockade, there is aid blockade and stuff like that. They release this. We can assume how much they actually like filter some of the information. And at some point, what happened is some of the military, political and military leaders started to speak. So they would release some videos and stuff like that. And they were saying, "Oh, we will defeat them soon. There will be an operation and then we'll defeat them." And they were saying, "Okay, the Eritrean government should withdraw, and if it has time, let it stay there. Let it die there, old and stuff like that." So everyone started now, got motivated. "Oh, they survived this? How did they survive?" and stuff like that. And they
I was shocked. Like, I think 6 months ago, like it was like when they were actually being like, "Oh yeah, they're winning."
Yeah. Then one day, they attacked a huge military depot on the border of Amhara and Tigray. So they caught them by surprise, and they caught another reinforcement force before it reached, and it completely changed the situation. Once they defeated that, the Ethiopian regime started to hold its ground, like it's tried to reinforce its forces around certain areas, but the the march of the Tigrayan forces was so fast and so sweeping that everyone started to kind of like consolidate their forces where they can hold the ground. So the Eritrean regime, actually, we were hearing the Eritrean regime was withdrawing its forces and in a hurry around Adigrat, for example. We
So is
heard
Eritrea
also,
still in Tigray?
in some parts of Tigray, yes.
Okay.
It's still in some
Is
parts.
it,
For
is
example,
it, have they mostly been defeated, or is it sort of just lingering groups? Like, what's the situation right now?
they are shelling Tigrayan towns currently. There are certain fighting. One of them actually mentioned by the one of them was mentioned by the Tigrayan authorities around what is it in Western Tigray, around Western Tigray, northwestern Tigray. There might be some low level also kind of conflicts that we don't hear about because
it's just basically siege tactics. Is they have the artillery, they have the planes, they clearly can't fight them on foot. So it's just what happens when you completely win the like infantry war. They'll just sit back and they'll just bomb you all, nonstop.
Yeah. So the Eritrean forces now occupy one just by themselves around northeastern Tigray, northwestern Tigray, and some parts of central Tigray. But it is close to their borders. But also they are also helping the Amhara forces in western Tigray, like they are fortified there also. So they are in Tigray. Now, when that happened, the Ethiopian troops at some point, as the Tigrayan forces were marching towards Ma'ala, we started hearing that the Ethiopian military was hurriedly trying to move out of Ma'ala, like they were dismantling communication devices, like communication installations, and also like stealing trucks and running, just trying to get out.
Do you think that the defense forces, the Tigrayan defense forces, were kind of using corruption against the regime, and they had insiders to know exactly what the tactics were going to be?
So I can tell you, within the government, it would be hard because they do not include anyone. They did not trust the Tigray. There was a puppet regime, right? What is it called? Interim government in Tigray, right? But they were completely supportive of the regime, so it would be hard. They worked as a double agent, but the thing is, because everyone in Tigray hated the occupation, hated the forces, they are eyes and ears of the Tigrayan defense forces. Everyone hated them. So if they see something, they would probably tell the occupation force arrangement.
Yeah, so it was just
so
people informing. It was people on the street informing.
Yeah,
basically
everything the regime did, they would know.
That's very interesting.
So I kind of want to touch on right now, Brian.
What's next? Do you want to talk like what's next?
Yeah, like what's next for both the forces fighting and potential future outcomes? Do you think it's going to get worse? Do you think it's going to get better? Like what do you think personally, based on evidence, whatever you have?
I think this is a good question. In my opinion, the worst is still happening, and the worst has already happened. But Tigray has survived. Like, it's not just genocide. They also wanted actually to eliminate Tigray as a polity. So what they wanted is they wanted to annex Western Tigray into Amhara, and they took they also wanted to annex some parts of Tigray to Eritrea, and they wanted to annex Southern Tigray to Amhara. So they wanted to eliminate the polity, right? And then disperse the Tigrayan community. The polity as a policy, they wanted to eliminate it. Interestingly, Tigray is actually one of the few polities that existed even before the federalism, that's regulated by the by some of the elites existed. Tigray existed as a polity, so they wanted to eliminate the longest surviving polity even within the Ethiopian state. So this
Well,
has
that seems like a common trend among genocidal regimes. That it seems to always be the oldest and most, I guess, stubborn ethnic groups that have existed forever, for ages, right?
yeah.
And there seems to be a very common trend. Why do you think that is? Do you think, just sort of touching on that before
Well, I
continuing on?
think the idea is they complain about being restive regime in the whole point of eliminating is like it's a resistance area. It's a mountainous place. There is a history of resistance, and it has been hard for the Ethiopian Empire.
Mountains is the biggest factor always.
Yeah, in my opinion, it is the mountains. So in the history, because of the mountains, there is a collective memory of resistance that we will not be submitted. So the idea is we will pay for the price, then we will eventually survive or prevail and stuff like that. It is a psychic of the community, but I think it has to do with the mountains, and the invaders are outsiders. They do not understand what they are getting into, because the regimes do not tell them what that is, right? The occupation, they completely invade Tigray without having a sense of what is at stake. So
The morale of the Ethiopian forces must be fucking devastated. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
so you get
exactly.
because just because you would think about some of the people, like especially in the South, it would like they probably wouldn't even know like what was even up there. They probably didn't even know there was mountains up there. So
Yeah, they were told actually they were told to join the army for peacekeeping purposes. They didn't even know there was, especially the newer ones. They were told it is for peacekeeping mission. The war is over and stuff like that, right? So the reason they wanted to attack was in terms of the political party and in terms of the polity, is because they think it is problematic region, right? It's not subtle. They talk about it in the media and stuff like that. They talk about how this region is that and that stuff like that. It is Tigray for them is it's both powerful and but also so weak that we don't need it, kind of thing. It is very interesting how the propaganda plays out. Um, so it survived. Like now, the world knows the Tigrayan community has put the situation in front of the world. They cannot hide it, right? Now, how much they are going to act is up to the world. Right? But the Tigrayan community now, they can know that they can survive, they can fight back. So it is much better than when it started. Now they have developed also survival skills, and fighting spirit is there, and they think they can actually win the war. And actually, in some circles within the Tigrayan community, they are criticizing the TPLF for not breaking the siege, right? They are pushing like, okay, why are people are dying? Like in some cases, 2,000 people die per day. In some estimates, but in some circles, even within the higher elites, they think that they
so
have the power to break the siege.
you're actually on what I was going to talk about is so this graph right here. The blue line is people acknowledging a single massacre. It's the Oxum massacre, and the red line is the regime propaganda, which specifically hashtag fake Oxum massacre, and Amnesty International used TPLF sources, which is just a great hashtag. I wonder why that one didn't take off.
So bad.
But it's very interesting because as far as the international community goes, governments didn't do shit on this one, and it's all been mainly the Ethiopian diaspora.
Yeah. Yes. So it looks like there is no way that it's very hard for the Ethiopian government to kind of start to go to Maqala. It would be very hard for it politically, diplomatically. and also even internally. It doesn't have the economies. Things are looking really bad even within Ethiopia. People are so tired, and there is also some division within the ruling coalition. That's one. So Tigray has survived. I think Tigray has survived, and it has the flexibility now and the experience and also the organizing. So I think it will be better even if the Ethiopian regime starts to attack Tigray, it renews its attacks to Tigray, then it will be the end of it. I think because of the experience and also the situation in the country. I don't think that's beneficial for the regime. So probably they are going to try to make peace work. And it looks like the genocidal rhetoric has subsided within Ethiopia. There are still some voices who are like agitating, but it looks like it's subsiding. So, or through the one that is tried
Well,
through.
that's something that surprised us like 6 months ago. Is like we were expecting that them kicking their asses out. Like we were expecting the ceasefire to come, but the defense forces were like, "No, we're moving forward. Like we're
Yeah,
who the fuck they fucked with." So
yeah, yeah.
they really pushed it and showed how much power they actually have. My
Yeah.
question is, what does Ethiopia lose letting them have just full autonomy?
Ideology, nothing. It would if they get. You mean in terms of like independence or like even more autonomy that they asking
It's
to?
a landlocked state, so there might have to be like some economic type deal going on where you might have
Mhm.
like a legal and political autonomy, but a linked economy type thing. Who knows? Whatever. Just some type of special treatment, freedom. Eritrea is kind of its own country. So
Mhm. So first of all, you have to understand that the war on Tigray was completely unnecessary. There was no benefit to it. It was worse for Abiy Ahmed. The only party that benefited from this war is Eritrea, completely. Eritrea benefited from this, not in all ways, but in its strategic objectives, it accomplished all of it. It destroyed Ethiopia, right? It destroyed the social fabric that Ethiopia had, and also you should understand also this war. You can look at it as an extension of the Ethio-Eritrean war. So Eritrea won this war because it has destroyed the social fabric within Ethiopia. It has destroyed Tigray, one of the strongest components of the Ethiopian state. So Israel actually accomplished its strategic objectives. But whether it will be long lasting, whether it will benefit Eritrea as a whole is another question. Now, why don't they give autonomy to Tigray is, well, first, as I told you, there is within the Ethiopian polity, within the Ethiopian politics, they do not like the fact there are very voiceful, powerful groups in Ethiopia that do not like the idea of autonomous regions. They want it
because it might
a
inspire other people to want their own autonomy and fall out from there.
Yeah, I will come to that. But this one, within Ethiopia, there is a nostalgia of empire, right? So they think, well, why is this small polity have a big say in Ethiopia? Then, according to Tigrayan nationalists, what they say is, we don't need Ethiopia. We can survive by ourselves. We actually need to get out of this fascistic empire state that has been bleeding Tigray forever, right? Now, all these people do not have power. You have to understand Ethiopia is a client state of the US, which means if the US doesn't want anything to happen, it won't happen. So the idea is nobody outside of Tigray wants Tigray to secede. But how this will turn out is I hear like here and there they talk about confederation, they talk about federation, and but the Tigrayan community is done. Like they want independence, and I don't know what is going to happen to the TPLF if it doesn't deliver a credible path for independence. or what Ethiopia can do to convince Tigray to stay.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Well, that's a good point to end.
Well, I was going to say, do you have a last question at all, or do?
Well, I was gonna, let me rephrase the question. Was what does Tigray as an area, as a people, mean to you?
Personally, Tigray, indigenous groups around there, like for example, Kunama, Afar, and Ago, and stuff like that. Its map changed over time. So, for example, at some point, some parts of Amhara were part of Tigray, some parts of Afar was part of Tigray, some parts of Ago was part of Tigray, and some parts in Eritrean thing. So the Tigrayan nationalists currently are trying to construct a certain level of Tigrayan nation-wise. They are trying to construct a Tigrayan identity, but I think that is misleading. But the only identity I can think of the area is resistance, in my opinion.
Okay.
That is common to everyone is, well, if something comes, we will resist. Other than that, I can tell you what they say, what the Tigrayan nationalists are trying to reconstruct. I can tell you, like, oh, we are the beginning of civilization in the Horn of Africa, and we will return to glory, and we can have our own country. We are different from these people. We don't do this. This is not our culture and stuff like that. So, but the only thing that I can tell you is the only thing that makes sense to me is this is a resistance area, both in anti-colonial resistance against empire, against the communist junta, and also now is against all of them, the Amhara, the collective collection of the empire, the Amhara politics, and then the Eritrean nation, newly constructed nation state, genocidal state also. So I would say it is just a resistance area.
Nice little wrapped it up there.
Let's
just plug anything real quick.
Yep. Where can people find you? What do you want people to look at? Sort of information that they can further their intake of what's happening in the area.
From liberal point of view, Omna Tigray, well, the mainstream is Omna Tigray, OMNA. Tigray is Tigray, Omna Tigray on Twitter, and they also have a website. That is the most, I think, more formal, more disciplined advocacy organization. But I actually like individual accounts. For example, Rishan on Twitter is good. Rishan would be RISHAN. I think I think this account, I would say it is de facto anti-fascist account, very disciplined account. The other is also the Horn Anarchists. It's a little bit it's a little bit edgy.
I like you, so.
It is a little bit risky sometimes. You might see some cringe, but I think it might have some good information also.
No worries.
If you want the Tigrayan nationalist version, you can go to Tighat Media. They also write some good things, like informative things.
What was their at?
Tighat Media is TGHAT Media, would be media, Tighat Media. Mm-hmm. They also have a website. But also,
sure
you
it'll
can also
be
go
linked on
to
the account, yeah?
Yeah, you can also, if they go to the bio of Horn Anarchists, I have put also what you can do. In my opinion, the minimum is to read the stories. For people is to read the stories, what's happening. I think if they read the stories, they'll find out what is missing, both in the movement and also in the international community's reaction to the mass atrocities that are happening in Tigray.